Thank you so much, Ace. We do have one more critical piece, and we will move through it very quickly, trying to be respectful of time and to also allow for, commentary and questions from those who are in attendance. But, one of the things that comes to mind for me is intent does not equal impact. You can be well-intentioned, and your impact can have lasting effects in horrible, horrible ways. So just know that although the intention, you may have wonderful intentions, that does not equate to impact. So just remind yourself of that. It's not really your intentions that matter. Unfortunately, it's not. It's the impact of what you do. So I would just really hope that if you can remember that piece, that's so very important. Intent does not equal impact. So one of the things that we did want to talk about is we wanted to talk about advocacy and anti-racism. And, the R word, racism. A lot of people don't want to say it, but it's real. And so racism is real. So we really need to focus on countering that racism, anti-racism. Now, Giselle, you mentioned something earlier, and I wanted to circle back to it because what you described is the definition of anti-racism. You mentioned giving Black kids the opportunities to speak, giving people the opportunities to explain themselves. Anti-racism is affording the same opportunities to people of color that white people inherently have, knowing that that is deserving, knowing that it is a right, and knowing that it should be there. And unfortunately, that is not always the case. So that is anti-racism. One of the biggest things we can do to separate anti-racism from social justice. I know, a lot of people love social justice, and social justice is so important, and it has its place, and so does multicultural competence and cultural competence and all those things. But one of the things that that lacks is action. So anti-racism is really rooted in action. And so when I think about action, I would just like to encourage you to think about three things. Actions as it relates to anti-racism and things that you can implement, things that you can do. Think about the people, policies, and the practices. Call them the 3 Ps. So what can you do? How can you communicate with the people who are being impacted? What do you say? How do you show up? And, allies are wonderful. But if you are the type of ally who reaches out to someone in private and you say, oh, I saw what happened to you, and I heard what happened to you, and I'm so sorry. That's not the kind of ally I want. It's just not. I need the type of ally who is going to show up for me in the spaces where I'm being discriminated against. I need the type of ally who is going to speak up for me when I am not in the room, because perhaps they have the power and the privilege to be there in my absence. So if you consider yourself to be an ally, you really, really, really need to show up, and you need to show up publicly, not in private. Nobody needs that. That is not the type of advocacy that is helpful. In fact, silence is permission. Silence is agreement. And so we need our allies to speak up. So you think about the people, the policies, and the practices. So what are the policies that are in place that perpetuate systemic oppression? What are the policies in place? I think about, being someone who is rooted in the criminal justice system and have worked in prisons and jails and a former parole probation officer. I think about the men who were on my caseload, who were there for possession of marijuana, where we have people who are now on the stock market investing in CBD, trying to get rich, but nobody's complaining about that. Those are the types of policies that disenfranchise people of color. I think about the difference between crack and cocaine. I think about the opioid addiction right now and how horrible it is. But when all that stuff happened in the 80s and early 90s, people were getting locked up left and right. And now we're looking for Narcan. And now we are trying to figure out how to get people treatment. Why were we not doing that in the 80s? I could talk about it all day, but I will spare you. The last thing are the practices.
Yeah, don't be trying.
Thank you. The last thing are the practices.
I got to get this. I've had this conversation with local politicians for the past several years. Here in Connecticut, all you see when you drive from West Hartford is cannabis. And when I'm trying to sell uniforms to a couple of dispensaries, all these people from the West Coast are coming out here and making tons of money. And just a couple of years ago, they've been locking Black and brown people up, giving them criminal records, and now all of a sudden they come out from San Francisco.
Oh, it looks like we lost Mark again. But you know what I will say is people, policies, and practices. It's the people, policies, and practices. And so, and you know, so in practice, what are you doing in practice? What are you doing in your at your jobs? What are you doing in your churches? What are you doing in your neighborhood? Well, how are you treating your neighbors? So those are the three things that I really think are so very important. We had some other things to share, but you know, we really want to be respectful of time and to allow you all the opportunities to engage and to ask your questions. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Ace. Thank you so much, Ace.